The scorching sun dipped below the rugged mountains of Wyoming Territory, casting long shadows across the dusty trail where Abigail Garland knelt alone, her tear-stained face turned toward the endless horizon that had swallowed up every person who'd ever promised to return. "They always leave," she whispered, her voice breaking as she clutched the crumpled telegram announcing her uncle's death, her last living relative gone. "No one ever stays." Dakota Blackwell hadn't meant to witness such a private moment of despair. He'd simply been riding back to his ranch when he spotted the young woman on the outskirts of Promise Creek. Her honey-colored hair had come loose from its pins, blowing across her face as her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. Something about her desolation struck him deeper than he cared to admit. "Miss," he called softly, reining his stallion closer. "Are you hurt?" Abigail startled, quickly wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'm fine," she insisted, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. She stood awkwardly, brushing dust from her faded blue dress. "Just a moment of weakness. Please, go about your business." Dakota dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. At 30, he'd seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize genuine despair. "Sometimes a moment of weakness is all we're allowed," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Dakota Blackwell. I own the Triple B ranch north of town." "Abigail Garland," she replied automatically, clutching the telegram tighter. "I'm nobody now, just passing through." "Nobody passes through Promise Creek without a reason, Miss Garland," Dakota said, his voice gentle but firm. "And nobody's nobody." Fresh tears welled in her eyes. "My uncle is dead. I came west to join him after my parents died, but he's—" Her voice broke. "I have nowhere to go, no one left. Everyone I've ever loved has left me behind." The setting sun painted her features in gold, highlighting the quiet dignity beneath her grief. Something stirred in Dakota's chest, a feeling he'd thought long buried after the war. "No one will stay," she wept, the words seeming to escape without her permission. Dakota moved slowly, leading his horse closer. Without overthinking it, he extended his hand. "I will." Abigail looked up, confusion mingling with her tears. "You don't know me. I'd like to," he answered simply. "Promise Creek could use a woman of courage, and my ranch needs someone who knows their letters. I can offer honest work and a safe place while you decide what comes next." She hesitated, studying his weathered face. "Why would you help a stranger?" Dakota's eyes, blue as a summer sky, held steady. "Because I've been lost too," he gestured to his horse. "Come with me, Miss Garland, at least for tonight." When she still hesitated, he added softly, "I give you my word you'll have a proper room at the ranch house, meals and fair wages. My housekeeper, Mrs. Willoughby, will make sure of your comfort, no strings attached." Something in his calm assurance broke through her despair. With a trembling nod, Abigail allowed him to help her onto his horse. Dakota swung up behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance as he took the reins. "I don't know what comes after tomorrow," he said as they rode toward the distant mountains, "but I promise you won't face it alone." Abigail couldn't explain why she trusted this stranger, this cowboy with the steady voice and kind eyes. Perhaps because in a world that had shown her nothing but loss, his simple promise, "I will," was the first thing that felt like hope. The Triple B Ranch sprawled across 1,000 acres of Wyoming wilderness. Its weathered buildings nestled in a protected valley with the Bighorn Mountains rising majestically behind them. As they approached the main house, Abigail tried to gather her composure, suddenly aware of how she must appear tear-stained and disheveled to the handful of ranch hands who paused in their evening chores to observe their boss returning with an unexpected visitor. "Don't mind them," Dakota said quietly. "They're good men, just curious." The main house was a sturdy two-story structure built of logs and local stone, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. As Dakota helped Abigail dismount, the front door swung open to reveal a stout woman with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp eyes. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, her gaze moving swiftly from him to Abigail. "I wasn't expecting company for supper." "Mrs. Willoughby, this is Miss Abigail Garland," Dakota replied. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Could you prepare the east bedroom and perhaps find something warm for her to eat?" The housekeeper's expression softened slightly as she took in Abigail's evident distress. "Of course." Come in, Miss Garland. You look half frozen despite the warm evening. A hot meal will set you right. Dakota handed his reins to a young ranch hand who had approached. Take care of midnight, Jimmy. I'll be in shortly. Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with polished wooden floors covered by colorful woven rugs, sturdy furniture, and walls adorned with landscape paintings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, where a small fire warded off the evening chill that descended quickly in the high country, even in summer. Mrs. Willoughby guided Abigail upstairs to a simple but clean bedroom. You can wash up here, she said, indicating a porcelain basin and pitcher. I'll bring up some hot water and find you something to change into. You're about the size my daughter was before she married and moved to Cheyenne. Left alone, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her circumstances had taken. Just hours ago, she'd learned that Uncle Thomas had died of pneumonia 3 weeks before she'd even arrived in Wyoming. The station master had been kind, but firm. The small cabin her uncle had owned outside town had already been reclaimed by his creditors. There was nothing for her here. She'd spent her last coins on a room at the boarding house for one night, planning to figure out her next steps in the morning. But the crushing reality of her situation alone, nearly penniless, in a harsh land where she knew no one had driven her to that lonely spot on the trail where Dakota Blackwell had found her. Mrs. Willoughby returned with hot water, a simple nightgown, and a robe. Supper will be ready in half an hour, she said. Take your time getting settled. Downstairs, Dakota stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames as he explained the situation to his foreman, Henry Atkins. You brought home another stray, boss, Henry observed, not unkindly. First that half-wild Mustang no one could break, then Jimmy when his pa drank himself to death, now this girl. Dakota smiled faintly. She's not a stray, Henry. She's a lady who's fallen on hard times, Thomas Garland's niece. Old Thomas, the prospector. Henry raised his eyebrows. Heard he passed. Tough break for the girl, coming all this way for nothing. She can help with the books and correspondence, Dakota said. I've been meaning to find someone since Mrs. Collins moved to Denver with her daughter. Henry studied his boss thoughtfully. In the 5 years he'd worked for Dakota Blackwell, he'd come to respect the man's fair-mindedness and quiet strength. Dakota had built the Triple B from almost nothing after returning from the war, transforming a run-down property into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. Just be careful, Henry finally said. Town's already got enough to gossip about with Randall making noise about water rights. Adding a pretty young woman to your household will give them more. Dakota's jaw tightened at the mention of Victor Randall, owner of the neighboring Silver Dollar Ranch and a constant thorn in his side. Let them talk. Miss Garland is under my protection, nothing more. When Abigail came downstairs for supper, she'd washed away her tears and pinned up her hair. The borrowed dress was a bit loose but clean and presentable. Dakota was struck again by her natural grace and the quiet determination that seemed to have replaced her earlier despair. Miss Garland, he said, standing as she entered the dining room, I hope you found everything you needed upstairs. Yes, thank you. She glanced around the table where Mrs. Willoughby was setting out plates. Mr. Blackwell, I appreciate your kindness, but I don't want to impose. Perhaps tomorrow you could direct me to the stage office. There's no stage due for another week, Dakota interrupted gently. And where would you go? Abigail faltered. I have a distant cousin in St. Louis. Perhaps she would take me in until I find employment. Or, Dakota said, you could stay here. As I mentioned, I need someone with education to help manage correspondence and keep the ranch books. The position includes room, board, and a fair wage. I couldn't possibly, Miss Garland, he said, his voice low and sincere. I'm offering employment, not charity. The Triple B is growing. I have contracts with the Army for beef, breeding stock to track, supply orders to manage. I need someone with a good head for figures and proper penmanship. Abigail hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. I was trained as a teacher back east. I do no bookkeeping. Then it's settled, Dakota said, as if the matter were resolved. You'll stay at least until the autumn. If you're unhappy here, I'll personally see that you reach St. Louis safely. Mrs. Willoughby served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked bread. As they ate, Dakota explained more about the ranch operations, and despite her lingering uncertainty, Abigail found herself drawn into the conversation. "The Triple B runs almost 2,000 head of cattle," he told her. "We're smaller than some outfits, but our breeding stock is superior. Quality over quantity has been my approach." "How did you come to ranching?" Abigail asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming her reserve. A shadow crossed Dakota's face. "After the war, I needed open spaces and honest work. My father was a farmer in Pennsylvania, but I had an uncle who'd moved west years before. He left me this land when he died. It was mostly wilderness, then took 3 years just to build the main structures and establish the herd." "The war changed many lives," Abigail said softly, thinking of her own father who had never fully recovered from his wounds at Antietam. Dakota nodded, a mutual understanding passing between them. "That it did, Miss Garland, but out here a person can begin again. The land doesn't care about your past, only what you make of your present." After supper, Dakota showed Abigail to a small office adjacent to the main room. "This is where you'd work," he explained, lighting a lamp that illuminated a sturdy desk, bookshelves, and a cabinet filled with papers. "It's not much, but it's organized chaos, as Mrs. Willoughby calls it." Abigail ran her fingers over the leather-bound ledgers. "When would you want me to start?" "Whenever you're ready," Dakota said. "Rest tomorrow if you need to. Get your bearings." As they stood in the quiet office, the lamplight casting a warm glow over them both, Abigail felt a strange sense of rightness, as if perhaps fate had guided her to this place after all. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for the position, but for—" She struggled to find the words. "For stopping on the trail," Dakota suggested, his eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Yes, for seeing me when I felt invisible." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a recognition of shared experience. "Good night, Miss Garland. Sleep well." As Abigail climbed the stairs to her room, exhaustion finally overtaking her, she realized that for the first time since receiving news of her uncle's death, she was thinking of tomorrow not with dread, but with cautious curiosity. Dawn broke over the Bighorn Mountains in streaks of pink and gold, painting the valley in soft light. Abigail woke to the unfamiliar sounds of a working ranch, voices calling, horses nickering, the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, until the events of the previous day rushed back. She dressed quickly in her own travel-worn dress, which Mrs. Willoughby had kindly washed and pressed overnight, and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, though the aroma of coffee and bacon suggested the kitchen was active. "Good morning, Miss Garland," Mrs. Willoughby greeted her. "The men have been up for hours, but I saved you breakfast. Thank you." "I'm not accustomed to sleeping so late," Abigail apologized, accepting a cup of strong coffee. "Nonsense. After what you've been through, you needed the rest." The housekeeper set a plate before her. "Mr. Blackwell asked me to tell you he'll be back midday. He and the men are moving cattle to the north pasture this morning." Abigail ate quickly, then asked, "Is there something I might do to help around the house?" Mrs. Willoughby looked surprised. "That's not necessary. Mr. Blackwell hired you for the books, not housework." "Even so, I'd like to be useful while I'm learning my way around," Abigail insisted. The older woman studied her appraisingly, then nodded. "Very well. You can help me with the baking if you've a mind to. We're making pies for Sunday dinner tomorrow." Together, they spent the morning in the kitchen, Abigail finding unexpected comfort in the familiar task of rolling dough and preparing apple filling. Mrs. Willoughby proved to be a repository of information about the ranch and its occupants, sharing stories as they worked. "Mr. Blackwell's a good man," she said as she expertly crimped a pie crust. "Fair with his workers, hard-working himself, built this place from almost nothing after the war left him with scars both seen and unseen. He fought in the war." Abigail asked, though she'd already guessed as much from their conversation the night before. "Cavalry. Doesn't speak of it much, but he came west with something to prove to himself." Mrs. Willoughby slid a pie into the oven. "Now, don't go repeating this, but there was a time I worried he'd work himself into an early grave. Driven, that man, like he was running from something. And now, He's found his purpose in this land, these animals, the people who depend on him. The housekeeper glanced at Abigail. It's not my place to say so, but the ranch has been missing a woman's touch since his sister Caroline returned east 3 years ago. She couldn't abide the isolation. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. I'm only here as an employee, Mrs. Willoughby. The older woman's eyes twinkled knowingly. Of course, dear. Now, tell me about yourself while we start on these cherry pies. As she worked, Abigail shared pieces of her own story, her childhood in Connecticut, her father's death from war injuries 5 years after the conflict ended, her mother's more recent passing from influenza, which had left Abigail with few options but to seek out her uncle in Wyoming. Life has dealt you some hard blows for one so young, Mrs. Willoughby observed. How old are you, child? 22, Abigail replied. Not so very young. Young enough to start fresh, the housekeeper said firmly. The West is full of second chances for those brave enough to take them. Shortly after noon, the sound of horses approaching drew them to the window. Dakota rode at the head of a small group of cowboys, his tall figure easily recognizable by his straight posture and the distinctive black Stetson he wore. There they are, Mrs. Willoughby said with satisfaction. Right on time for dinner. You'll see how these men can eat after a morning's work. The kitchen soon filled with hungry ranch hands, who greeted Abigail with shy politeness before turning their attention to the hearty meal Mrs. Willoughby had prepared. Dakota came in last, having seen to his horse first. Miss Garland, he said, removing his hat. I trust you slept well. Very well, thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of flour dust on her apron. Mrs. Willoughby has been kind enough to let me assist her this morning. Dakota glanced at the pies cooling on the sideboard, his expression appreciative. It seems we've gained more than bookkeeping skills with your arrival. After the meal, while the ranch hands returned to their afternoon duties, Dakota invited Abigail to tour the property. If you're to help manage ranch affairs, you should understand its operations, he explained, saddling a gentle mare for her use. Abigail hesitated at the mounting block. I haven't ridden since I was a girl, she admitted. Daisy here is steady as they come, Dakota assured her. She'll take good care of you. With his guidance, Abigail settled into the saddle, finding the rhythm of the horse's movement easier to recall than she'd expected. They rode at a leisurely pace, Dakota pointing out features of the ranch, the various pastures, the creek that provided water year-round, the corrals where young horses were trained. It's beautiful, Abigail said sincerely as they paused atop a low rise that afforded a view of the entire valley. I can see why you chose this place to begin again. Dakota looked at her with sudden interest. Is that what you're seeking as well? A new beginning, Abigail considered the question. I hadn't thought of it that way. When I left Connecticut, I was simply following the only path available to me. But now, she gazed across the rolling landscape, feeling something unfamiliar stir within her. Perhaps that's exactly what I need. The territory isn't easy on anyone, Dakota warned. Winters are harsh, comforts are few, and civilization as you knew it back east is scarce. But there's freedom here and opportunity for those willing to work for it. Like you did, Abigail observed. A rare smile crossed his face, transforming his serious countenance. Like I'm still doing, Miss Garland, a ranch is never finished, only ever becoming what its people make of it. As they continued their ride, Dakota shared his vision for the Triple B expanding the breeding program, perhaps adding sheep on the higher pastures, improving the irrigation systems. Abigail found herself drawn into his plans, offering suggestions based on articles she'd read in agricultural journals back east. You have a practical mind, Dakota commented as they turned back toward the ranch house, the afternoon sun warming their shoulders. My father believed education should be useful, Abigail replied. He encouraged me to read widely and understand business matters, even when others thought it improper for a young lady. He sounds like a wise man. He was, she said softly. The war changed him physically, but his mind remained sharp until the end. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in memories. As they approached the ranch yard, Dakota cleared his throat. There's a social gathering in town tomorrow after church services. Nothing fancy, just folks bringing food to share at the schoolhouse. Would you care to attend? It might help you get acquainted with the community." Abigail hesitated, suddenly conscious of her limited wardrobe and her status as a newcomer. "I'm not sure I'm prepared for social calls just yet." "Mrs. Willoughby mentioned you helped with the baking today," Dakota said. "Those pies would be a fine introduction to Promise Creek society." And he added with a hint of mischief in his eyes, "It would give the good citizens something to talk about besides cattle prices and Victor Randall's latest complaints." His obvious attempt to tempt her with the prospect of local gossip surprised a laugh from Abigail. "Well, when you put it that way, how could I refuse? Though I have nothing suitable to wear for church. Mrs. Willoughby might help with that," Dakota suggested. "And if not, no one here stands on ceremony the way they do back east. Clean and tidy is all that's expected." As he helped her dismount back at the stables, his hands steady at her waist, Abigail was struck by how quickly her circumstances had changed. Just yesterday, she had been lost and alone, weeping on a dusty trail. Today, she had work, shelter, and the beginnings of what might become a place in this community. "Thank you for the tour," she said, looking up at Dakota, "and for everything else." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "You're welcome, Miss Garland. I believe the Triple B will be better for your presence." Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Willoughby had indeed helped with Abigail's clothing dilemma, producing a simple but well-made blue dress that had belonged to her daughter. "Jenny won't miss it," she assured Abigail. "She's taken to city fashions now that her husband's business is doing well." The small white church in Promise Creek was nearly full when Dakota's wagon arrived with Abigail, Mrs. Willoughby, and two of the younger ranch hands who had elected to attend services. Abigail felt the curious stares of the congregants as Dakota escorted her to a pew, but she held her head high, drawing on her New England reserve. Reverend Wallace, a kindly man with a booming voice, delivered a sermon on perseverance and faith that seemed particularly apt to Abigail's situation. After the service, Dakota introduced her to several townspeople, including the mayor, the general store owner, and the schoolteacher, Miss Peterson. "We're always in need of educated women in the territory," Miss Peterson told her warmly. "If you ever consider teaching again, please let me know. I could use an assistant when the winter term begins." The social gathering afterwards was held in the one-room schoolhouse, with trestle tables set up to hold an impressive array of food brought by the families. Abigail's apple and cherry pies were well received, earning her compliments that helped ease her self-consciousness. "You've made quite an impression," Dakota murmured as they filled their plates. "Mrs. Evans has already asked if you might share your pie crust recipe with the Ladies' Aid Society." Abigail smiled, feeling a tentative sense of belonging. The secret is cold butter and a light touch. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, imposing man whose expensive clothes and confident manner immediately commanded attention. Beside him stood a striking blonde woman in a fashionable dress that seemed out of place in the simple schoolhouse. "Randall," Dakota said quietly, his expression cooling. "And his daughter Eleanor." "Mr. Blackwell," the man called, making his way toward them. "What a surprise to see you in town. I thought Sunday was when you counted your cattle to make sure none had wandered onto my land." Dakota's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "Victor, Miss Randall, I trust you're both well." "Thriving," Victor Randall replied, his gaze shifting to Abigail with undisguised curiosity. "And who might this be, Miss Abigail Garland?" Dakota said. "She's recently joined the Triple B to manage our accounts and correspondence." "Miss Garland, this is Victor Randall of the Silver Dollar Ranch and his daughter Eleanor." "How interesting," Eleanor said, her voice honeyed but her eyes sharp. "Father just hired a Harvard-educated accountant from Denver. I wasn't aware bookkeeping required a feminine touch." Abigail smiled pleasantly, refusing to be baited. "How fortunate for your ranch to have such expertise. I'm merely applying skills learned in my previous position as a teacher." Victor Randall looked Abigail over with an evaluating gaze that made her uncomfortable. "Thomas Garland's niece, are you not? I heard you'd arrived just after his passing. Unfortunate timing." "Yes, it was," Abigail acknowledged, wondering how news traveled so quickly. Well, Blackwell always did have a knack for collecting strays, Randall said with false joviality. First those wild Mustangs no one else wanted. Now, Miss Garland is hardly a stray, Dakota interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of warning. She's a valued employee and my guest today. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe Mrs. Wallace is signaling that it's time for the blessing over the meal. As they moved away, Abigail whispered, I gather there's no love lost between you and Mr. Randall. Dakota's expression was grim. Victor Randall believes money entitles him to whatever he wants. He's been trying to buy or bully smaller ranchers out of the valley for years. The Triple B stands in his way because we control access to the best water source in the region. Hence his comment about cattle wandering onto his land. He's been claiming that my herds damage his property, just an excuse to pressure the territorial officials to rule in his favor on water rights. Dakota shook his head, but today isn't for ranch disputes, it's for welcoming you to Promise Creek. Throughout the afternoon, Abigail met more townspeople, gradually feeling less like an outsider. Several of the local women made a point of inviting her to join their quilting circle or to attend the next church social. Dakota seemed pleased by her reception, remaining attentive without hovering. As they prepared to return to the ranch late in the day, Abigail caught sight of Alina Randall watching them with a calculating expression. I believe Miss Randall doesn't approve of me, she commented, as Dakota helped her into the wagon. He glanced over his shoulder at the blonde woman, then shrugged. Alina Randall doesn't approve of anything that doesn't advance her father's interests or her own ambitions, which are, Dakota's mouth quirked in a half-smile. To be the most important woman in the territory, by whatever means necessary. There was a time when she thought marriage to the owner of the Triple B might serve that purpose. Abigail raised her eyebrows in surprise. You and Miss Randall were engaged. Good Lord, no, Dakota said with a short laugh. But Victor made it clear such an arrangement would be welcome right before he threatened to divert the creek that feeds my north pastures. How romantic, Abigail said dryly, Dakota's eyes crinkled with genuine amusement. I thought so too. Needless to say, the Randalls and the Triple B maintain a careful distance from each other these days. On the ride back to the ranch, with Mrs. Willoughby dozing across from them and the young ranch hands following on horseback, Abigail found herself studying Dakota's profile against the setting sun. There was a strength in his features that went beyond the physical, a quiet determination and integrity that she found increasingly compelling. When he turned and caught her watching him, she didn't look away as propriety might have dictated. Instead, she smiled, acknowledging the connection that seemed to be forming between them, a bridge built of shared conversations, mutual respect, and perhaps something more that neither was ready to name. The following weeks settled into a rhythm that brought Abigail unexpected contentment. Mornings were devoted to organizing the ranch accounts, which she discovered had been neglected but not mismanaged. Dakota proved to be methodical in his record-keeping, if not always prompt with filing correspondence or balancing the ledgers. In the afternoons, when her office work was complete, Abigail often helped Mrs. Willoughby with household tasks or continued improving her riding skills. Dakota had given her the use of Daisy, the gentle mare, and Abigail grew more confident with each outing. You're a natural, Dakota told her one evening as they returned from a ride to the western boundary of the ranch. Most Easterners take months to develop your seat in the saddle. I had excellent motivation, Abigail replied. The view from horseback is far superior to that from a wagon. July gave way to August, bringing with it the intense activity of preparing for the fall cattle drive. The ranch buzzed with energy as cowboys mended tack, shod horses, and conducted practice roundups of the scattered herds. Abigail found herself increasingly involved in the planning, ordering supplies and helping Dakota calculate the provisions needed for the men during the long journey to the railhead in Cheyenne. 200 head to the Army at Fort Laramie, another 400 to the buyers in Cheyenne, Dakota explained as they reviewed the contracts one evening in the office. It's our biggest drive yet. Will you be gone long? Abigail asked, trying to keep her voice casual, though the thought of his extended absence created an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. Dakota looked up from the papers, his expression softening. 3 weeks if the weather holds. Henry will lead the drive to Cheyenne while I handle the Army delivery. I should be back sooner. The ranch will manage without you, she said, busying herself with organizing the contracts to hide her relief that his absence wouldn't be prolonged. Will you? The question was soft, almost tentative. Abigail met his gaze, seeing in it a reflection of her own growing attachment. I've grown accustomed to our conversations, she admitted. The evenings will be quieter. A knock at the office door interrupted whatever Dakota might have said in response. Jimmy, the young ranch hand, stood there looking anxious. Mr. Blackwell, riders coming in, looks like Randall and some of his men. Dakota's expression immediately hardened. Stay here, he told Abigail, rising from his chair. This won't take long. Ignoring his instruction, Abigail followed him onto the porch, where Victor Randall and 3 of his cowboys were dismounting. Even from a distance, the tension was palpable. Blackwell, Randall called, his voice carrying across the yard. We need to talk about those strays of yours that keep finding their way onto my property. Dakota descended the steps, his posture relaxed but alert. My cattle are all accounted for, Victor. If you found strays, they're not from the Triple B. 6 head with your brand were on my south range this morning, Randall insisted. That's trespassing, and I have the right to demand compensation for damaged grazing land. If any Triple B cattle crossed your boundary, they were driven there, Dakota replied evenly. My men are too careful for accidents like that. Randall's face flushed with anger. Are you accusing me of rustling? I'm saying there are no accidental crossings between our properties, not with the natural boundaries and the fencing we've both maintained. Dakota crossed his arms. If you found Triple B cattle on your land, someone put them there. One of Randall's cowboys stepped forward aggressively, but Randall held up a hand to stop him. Careful, Blackwell, that's a serious accusation. No more serious than yours, Dakota replied. Now state your business plainly or leave my property. Randall's gaze shifted to Abigail, who stood watching from the porch. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, man to man. Miss Garland manages the ranch accounts, Dakota said firmly. If you're making claims that affect the Triple B financially, she has every right to hear them. Something ugly flickered across Randall's face. Times must be hard if you're resorting to hiring women to do a man's job, or perhaps there are other services involved that justify the expense. The insult hung in the air for a heartbeat before Dakota moved with startling speed, grabbing Randall by his expensive coat lapels and almost lifting him off the ground. Apologize to the lady, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Now. The 3 cowboys with Randall reached for their weapons, but Henry and several Triple B hands appeared from the barn, rifles ready. Easy now, Henry called. Nobody needs to die today. Randall, his face pale with fury, raised his hands. Let go of me, Blackwell. I meant no offense to the lady. Dakota released him with a slight shove. You've said your piece, Victor. I'll send men to check the south boundary tomorrow. If any Triple B cattle are there, we'll retrieve them, but I want 2 of your men to ride along as witnesses. Fine, Randall spat, straightening his coat. But this isn't finished. Water rights come up before the Territorial Commission next month. You might find yourself with more problems than a few stray cattle. As Randall and his men rode away, Dakota turned to find Abigail still standing on the porch, her expression troubled. I apologize you had to witness that, he said as he climbed the steps. Are such confrontations common? She asked. Dakota sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. More common lately. Randall's desperate to control the creek that runs through both our properties. Without it, the Triple B couldn't survive, and he knows it. Could he actually succeed in taking your water rights? Legally. It's possible, though not likely. The Territorial Commission usually favors established claims, and the Triple B was here first. Dakota's expression darkened. But Randall has money for bribes and friends in the territorial government, and he's not above creating incidents to make it appear I'm mismanaging the land. Like claiming your cattle are trespassing, Abigail concluded. Exactly. Dakota held the door for her as they re-entered the house. I've doubled the men patrolling our boundaries, but with the cattle drive preparations, we're stretched thin. Abigail was silent for a moment, thinking. His timing seems calculated just before your biggest drive of the year, when your attention is divided. Dakota looked at her with newfound respect. That's perceptive and concerning. What about his daughter? Could she influence him? Eleanor. Dakota shook his head. She's as ambitious as her father, just more refined in her methods. In some ways, she's more dangerous. Later that evening, after the ranch had settled for the night, Abigail found Dakota still in the office, poring over maps of the ranch boundaries. You should rest, she said from the doorway. Tomorrow will be another long day. He looked up, the lamplight casting shadows across his face that emphasized his weariness. I can't stop thinking about Randall's accusations. The timing is too convenient. Abigail entered the room, moving to stand beside him at the desk. You believe he's planning something during the cattle drive? I do. With half my men away and my attention divided between Fort Laramie and Cheyenne. Dakota shook his head. It would be the perfect opportunity for mischief. Without overthinking it, Abigail placed her hand on his shoulder. Then perhaps you should reconsider the arrangements. Send Henry to Fort Laramie and lead the Cheyenne drive yourself, or stay here and let Henry handle both deliveries. Dakota covered her hand with his own, the contact sending a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer night. I can't ask Henry to take that responsibility. The Army contract is too important. Then I'll manage things here, Abigail said with more confidence than she felt. Between Mrs. Willoughby, Jimmy, and the men you're leaving behind, we can keep watch on Randall's activities. Dakota turned in his chair to face her, still holding her hand. That's asking too much of you. You came here for a bookkeeping position, not to defend the ranch against hostile neighbors. I came here with nothing, Abigail reminded him softly. You gave me purpose when I had none, trust when I was a stranger. Let me help now. In the intimate space between them, something shifted, a recognition of feelings that had been building since that first encounter on the dusty trail. Dakota stood slowly, bringing them face to face, close enough that Abigail could see the flecks of lighter blue in his eyes. Abigail, he said, using her given name for the first time. A sudden crash from the kitchen interrupted the moment. They jumped apart as Mrs. Willoughby's voice called out in alarm. Dakota was moving instantly, Abigail close behind. They found the housekeeper in the kitchen, a broken lantern at her feet and oil spreading across the floor. Something hit the window, Mrs. Willoughby explained, pointing to the shattered glass. I was startled and dropped the lamp. Dakota cautiously approached the window, peering out into the darkness. Stay back, he warned, drawing the revolver he kept at his belt. Moving swiftly to the door, he slipped outside while Abigail helped Mrs. Willoughby clean up the broken glass and spilled oil. This isn't the first strange occurrence, the housekeeper confided in a low voice. 2 nights ago, I heard riders near the house well after midnight. And yesterday, Jimmy found one of the corral gates open, though he swears he secured it himself. Dakota returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. Someone was out there. Found tracks leading back toward the eastern boundary Randall's direction. Just mischief or something more. Abigail asked, hard to say, could have been one of Randall's men trying to rattle us or local boys playing pranks. Dakota holstered his weapon. Either way, I'm posting a night guard starting tomorrow. That night, Abigail lay awake long after the household had gone quiet, her mind replaying the interrupted moment in the office. What had Dakota been about to say? More importantly, what was she feeling for this man who had become so central to her life in such a short time? She had come west seeking security after losing everything, not expecting to find a connection that made her heart beat faster whenever Dakota entered a room. The rational part of her warned against trusting these feelings. They had known each other barely 2 months, and her position at the ranch was still new and potentially temporary. Yet there was an undeniable pull between them. A sense of recognition that transcended their brief acquaintance. Dakota truly saw her in a way no one else ever had. Not as a dependent relative or a proper young lady to be married off, but as a capable, intelligent woman with value beyond her social standing. As dawn approached, Abigail finally drifted to sleep, having reached no conclusions but feeling oddly hopeful nonetheless. Whatever was developing between them would have to wait until after the cattle drive and the resolution of the tension with Randall. For now, it was enough to know that the possibility of something more existed. The next week passed in a flurry of activity as final preparations for the cattle drive were completed. Dakota and Abigail maintained a careful politeness around each other, both aware of the unresolved moment they had shared, but neither willing to address it before Dakota's departure. The morning the drive was to begin, Abigail rose before dawn to help Mrs. Willoughby prepare a hearty breakfast for the cowboys. The atmosphere in the kitchen was cheerful despite the early hour, with men joking and sharing tales of previous drives as they fueled up for the long day ahead. Dakota entered last, looking every inch the rancher in his worn leather chaps, sturdy boots, and dust-colored hat. His eyes found Abigail immediately, and a quiet understanding passed between them. "Miss Garland," he said, accepting the coffee she offered, "would you walk with me a moment? There are some final instructions I'd like to review." Outside, in the gray light of approaching dawn, they stood by the corral where the horses for the drive were already saddled and waiting. "Henry will stay in radio contact as much as possible," Dakota said, his voice professional though his eyes conveyed more personal concern. "If there's any trouble any at all, send Jimmy to town with a telegram to Sheriff Barnes." "We'll be fine," Abigail assured him. "Mrs. Willoughby has her shotgun, and the men staying behind know to keep watch on the boundaries." Dakota nodded, then reached into his pocket. "I want you to have this," he said, extending a small revolver. "It's loaded. Do you know how to use it?" Abigail took the weapon, feeling its weight in her palm. "My father taught me after the war. He believed every household should be able to defend itself." "Good." Dakota's approval was evident. "Keep it with you, especially if you ride out alone." "I will," she promised, tucking it into the pocket of her skirt. "Dakota," she hesitated, then continued, "please be careful. It's not just Randall's men who pose dangers on a cattle drive." His expression softened at her concern. "I've made this trip a dozen times." "We'll be back before you know it." Impulsively, Abigail reached up and straightened his bandana. "See that you are. The Triple B needs its leader." Dakota caught her hand as she lowered it, holding it against his chest where she could feel the steady beat of his heart. "And its leader needs his bookkeeper," he said softly, "among other things." Before Abigail could respond, Henry called that it was time to move out. Dakota released her hand reluctantly. 3 weeks, he said. "Sooner if I can manage it. I'll be here," she replied simply. She stood with Mrs. Willoughby and the remaining ranch hands, watching as Dakota led the long procession of cowboys and cattle out of the ranch yard and toward the distant mountains. Only when the dust had settled and the last rider had disappeared from view did Abigail turn back to the house, already feeling the emptiness of Dakota's absence. The first week passed uneventfully. Abigail settled into a routine of managing the reduced ranch operations, keeping the books updated, and riding out each afternoon to check on the closer pastures. Jimmy, the young ranch hand who had quickly appointed himself her unofficial protector, often accompanied her on these excursions. "Mr. Blackwell would have my hide if anything happened to you, Miss Garland," he explained earnestly when she insisted she could ride alone. By the second week, however, the peaceful atmosphere began to change. First came reports from town that riders from the Silver Dollar Ranch had been asking questions about the Triple BTK's cattle drive schedule and the number of men who had gone with Dakota. Then, on a clear Tuesday afternoon, Abigail and Jimmy were returning from checking fence lines when they spotted 3 riders on a ridge overlooking the ranch house. "Randall's men," Jimmy said grimly, recognizing the distinctive gray hats worn by the Silver Dollar hands. "They're watching the place. Let's not give them the satisfaction of knowing we've seen them," Abigail suggested, continuing their casual pace toward home though her heart had begun to race. That evening, as Abigail was completing the day's entries in the ledger, the sound of approaching horses drew her to the window. Through the gathering dusk, she made out 2 riders entering the ranch yard at a trot. Mrs. Willoughby appeared at her side. "It's Alina Randall," she said with surprise, "and one of her father's foremen." Abigail quickly checked her appearance in the small mirror hanging by the door, smoothing her hair and straightening her collar before stepping onto the porch to greet the unexpected visitors. Alina Randall dismounted with practiced grace, handing her reins to the burly man who accompanied her. She was dressed for riding in a tailored jacket and split skirt, her blonde hair neatly coiled beneath a fashionable hat. "Miss Garland," she called, approaching the porch with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I hope you'll forgive the unexpected visit. Father mentioned you were managing the Triple B in Mr. Blackwell's absence, and I thought it only neighborly to call on you." Abigail maintained a polite expression, though her instincts warned her to be cautious. "How thoughtful, Miss Randall. Would you care to come in for tea?" "That would be lovely," Alina replied, ascending the steps. To her companion she added, "Wait with the horses, Mr. Diggs. This is a social call." Inside, Mrs. Willoughby served tea in the parlor, her expression making it clear she shared Abigail's suspicions about their visitors' motives. Alina accepted her cup with murmured thanks, her sharp gaze taking in every detail of the room. "I must say, Miss Garland, you've made quite an impression in Promise Creek," Alina began. "It's not often we have newcomers with your background." "My background?" Abigail asked mildly. "Eastern education, refined manners," Alina elaborated. "One wonders what brought you to our little corner of the territory, and to the Triple B specifically." "Circumstances and good fortune," Abigail replied, unwilling to share her personal history with this woman who clearly had an agenda. "Mr. Blackwell was kind enough to offer employment when I needed it most." Alina's smile tightened. "Yes, Dakota has always had a soft heart for those in need. It's one of his more admirable qualities, though perhaps not the most practical for a rancher in these parts." "I've found Mr. Blackwell to be both compassionate and practical," Abigail countered. "The Triple BTK's success speaks to his business acumen." "Indeed." Alina set down her cup. "Which makes his continuing refusal to consider my father's water rights proposal all the more frustrating. The silver dollar could offer fair compensation for shared access enough to make significant improvements to the Triple B." Ah, Abigail thought. Here was the real purpose of the visit. "I believe Mr. Blackwell has made his position on water rights quite clear," she said carefully. "The creek is essential to Triple B operations." "As it would be to ours," Alina replied. "Surely you, with your Eastern education, can see the benefit of cooperation over conflict. Perhaps you might influence Dakota to reconsider once he returns." The implication was clear, and Abigail felt her cheeks warm with indignation. "My position here is as bookkeeper and ranch manager in Mr. Blackwell's absence, Miss Randall. I don't presume to influence his business decisions." Alina studied her with calculating eyes. "Come now, Miss Garland. We're both women of the world. Your position here is unconventional, to say the least. A single woman living in a bachelor's household, taking on responsibilities typically reserved for men." "Times are changing, Miss Randall," Abigail replied evenly, "even in Wyoming Territory." "Not that quickly," Alina said with a brittle laugh. "But I understand. Dakota is a handsome man with a successful ranch. Any woman would find him an attractive prospect." "I find your insinuations offensive," Abigail said, setting her own cup down with a sharp click. "Mr. Blackwell has been nothing but a perfect gentleman and fair employer." Alina rose, smoothing her riding skirt. "No offense intended, Miss Garland. I merely wanted to make you aware that there are options for your future here beyond the Triple B. My father is always looking for educated people to help manage his business interests. The salary would be substantially more than what Dakota can afford to pay." Abigail stood as well, her patience exhausted. "Thank you for the tea, Miss Randall, but I'm quite satisfied with my current position." As she showed Alina to the door, the blonde woman paused on the threshold. "One last thing, Miss Garland. There's to be a territorial hearing on water rights next month. Should Dakota continue his stubborn resistance, my father will be forced to present evidence that the Triple B is mismanaged and Dakota unfit to maintain his current claim." "That would be difficult to prove," Abigail said confidently. "The Triple BTK's records are immaculate and the ranch is well run. Eleanor's smile turned predatory. Records can be challenged, Miss Garland, especially when the person keeping them has a personal interest in the outcome. She donned her gloves. Do consider my father's offer. For everyone's sake. After Eleanor and her escort had ridden away, Abigail remained on the porch, her mind racing. The visit had been a thinly veiled combination of bribery and threat, confirming Dakota's suspicions that the Randalls were planning something while he was away. That woman is a rattlesnake in silk, Mrs. Willoughby declared, joining Abigail outside. Always has been, even as a girl. She made it quite clear they're planning to challenge Dakota's water rights at the territorial hearing, Abigail said worriedly, and implied they might question the ranch's records and my integrity in keeping them. The housekeeper snorted. Victor Randall questioning anyone's integrity is rich. That man would steal the coins from a dead man's eyes. Nevertheless, we should be prepared, Abigail decided. I'll review all the ranch records tomorrow, making sure everything is in order and creating duplicate copies of the most important documents. That night, a summer thunderstorm rolled through the valley, bringing welcome rain but also jangling Abigail's already taut nerves. Each crash of thunder seemed to underscore the threats facing the Triple B and, by extension, the new life she was building here. She found herself wondering where Dakota was tonight, whether he and his men had found shelter from the storm or were riding through it, pushing the cattle toward their destination. The thought of him out there, perhaps thinking of her as she was thinking of him, brought both comfort and a strange ache of longing. Morning revealed the storm's legacy in muddy paths and a swollen creek, but also in the fresh, clean scent of rain-washed earth. Abigail spent the day in the office as planned, methodically reviewing the ranch records and making copies of key documents, which she then secured in a locked box for safekeeping. The third week of Dakota's absence began with an unexpected visit from Sheriff Barnes, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement whose weathered face gave little away as he accepted coffee in the ranch kitchen. Just making my rounds, he explained, though his eyes were watchful. Thought I'd check in, see how you folks are managing with the boss away. We're doing well enough, Abigail replied, though we've had some interested parties keeping an eye on the place. The sheriff nodded slowly. Randall's men, I expect. They've been mighty active lately, riding boundaries and asking questions in town. Miss Randall paid me a visit last week, Abigail informed him. She made it quite clear that her father intends to challenge Dakota's water rights at the next territorial hearing. Barnes sipped his coffee thoughtfully. That's been coming for a while. Randall's been buying up smaller spreads all around the valley, but the Triple B is the prize he really wants mainly because of that creek. Is there any real chance he could succeed? Abigail asked, voicing the fear that had been growing since Eleanor's visit. In a fair hearing, no, Blackwell's claim is solid, his management of the land exemplary. The sheriff set down his cup. But territorial politics aren't always fair, Miss Garland. Randall has friends in high places and money to make more friends when needed. What would you advise? Barnes considered the question seriously. Be vigilant. Document anything unusual trespassers, tampering with boundaries, suspicious activities. And he hesitated, then continued. It might be wise to have someone stay in town the night before the hearing. Randall wouldn't be above creating a distraction to keep Blackwell from attending. After the sheriff departed, Abigail shared his concerns with Mrs. Willoughby and the remaining ranch hands. They established a rotation of night watches and agreed that no one would ride out alone, even during daylight hours. The precautions proved prescient when, 2 days later, Jimmy discovered evidence that someone had tampered with the irrigation gates controlling water flow from the creek to the Triple B's pastures. Tried to make it look like natural damage from the storm, Jimmy explained as he showed Abigail the broken lock and carefully cut supporting timbers. But this was deliberate, meant to flood the lower fields and waste water. Abigail documented the damage with detailed notes and sketches, then supervised the repairs. That evening, she penned a lengthy letter to Dakota at Fort Laramie, detailing the incidents and her concerns about the upcoming hearing. Whether it would reach him before his return was uncertain, but she felt better having recorded everything. The final days of Dakota's expected absence passed with increasing tension. Twice, ranch hands reported seeing riders near the boundaries at night. Once, shots were fired at a Triple B cowboy checking fence lines, though fortunately they went wide. When the 3-week mark arrived with no sign of Dakota or the men who had accompanied him to Fort Laramie, Abigail tried to quell her growing anxiety. Cattle drives were unpredictable. Delays were common due to weather, river crossings, or 1,000 other factors. Still, as she stood on the porch at sunset, scanning the horizon for any sign of returning riders, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "He'll be back," Mrs. Willoughby assured her, bringing out a shawl against the evening chill. "Dakota Blackwell is too stubborn to let anything keep him from his ranch for long." "I know," Abigail said, accepting the shawl gratefully. "I just can't help worrying with everything that's happened." The housekeeper's knowing gaze rested on her face. "It's not just the ranch you're concerned about, is it?" Abigail blushed but didn't deny it. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's watched you both dancing around your feelings these past months," Mrs. Willoughby said with a smile. "For what it's worth, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Before Abigail could respond, Jimmy came running from the barn, his young face alight with excitement. "Riders coming, from the North Trail." Abigail's heart leapt as she strained to see in the fading light. Sure enough, a group of horsemen was approaching, dust rising from their mounts' hooves as they trotted toward the ranch. "Is it them?" she asked, unable to make out individuals at this distance. Jimmy shaded his eyes. "That's Mr. Blackwell in the lead. I'd know his black hat anywhere." Relief washed over Abigail so intensely that her knees felt weak. She gripped the porch railing, watching as the riders drew closer, counting heads to ensure all had returned safely. Dakota rode directly to the house, dismounting in one fluid motion despite the obvious weariness in his frame. His face was sun-darkened and stubbled with several days' growth of beard, but his eyes were clear and searching as they found Abigail on the porch. "Miss Garland," he said, removing his hat. "The ranch looks to be in one piece. I trust everything's well." The formality of his greeting in front of the men couldn't mask the warmth in his voice or the way his gaze lingered on her face, as if reassuring himself that she too was unchanged. "We've managed, Mr. Blackwell," she replied with equal formality, though her smile conveyed more. "Welcome home." Later, after the men had tended their horses and gathered for a hearty meal prepared by a jubilant Mrs. Willoughby, Dakota and Abigail finally had a moment alone in the office. He had bathed and changed into clean clothes, looking more like himself though fatigue still lined his face. "The drive went well?" Abigail asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Better than expected. The Army took all 200 head at Fort Laramie, and Henry got top dollar for the Cheyenne delivery." Dakota accepted the coffee gratefully, "But I gather things haven't been entirely peaceful here." Abigail summarized the events of the past 3 weeks Aliner's visit, the damaged irrigation gates, the boundary riders, and Sheriff Barnes's warnings about the water rights hearing. Dakota listened intently, his expression darkening. "Randall's getting bolder. Tampering with the irrigation system is a serious offense if we could prove it was his men. We have Jimmy's observations and my documentation," Abigail said. "Whether that's enough for legal action, I'm not sure. It's a start." Dakota set down his cup and moved to stand beside her at the desk where she had laid out her careful records of the incidents. "You've done an outstanding job, Abigail. Better than I could have hoped." The praise warmed her, but it was his proximity that made her pulse quicken. After 3 weeks of absence, the connection between them seemed even stronger, as if the separation had only clarified what they meant to each other. "I was worried when you didn't return exactly on schedule," she admitted, looking up at him. "We were delayed crossing the Platte," he explained. "The recent rains made the river higher than usual." His expression softened. "I pushed the men hard the last 2 days, knowing what might be happening here. Because of Randall, partly," Dakota acknowledged, "and partly because I couldn't bear being away from you any longer." The simple honesty of his words stole Abigail's breath. "Dakota," he took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. When I rode out 3 weeks ago, I left something unfinished between us, something important. Abigail's heart hammered in her chest. I remember. I've had a lot of time to think, moving those cattle across the territory, Dakota continued, about what matters most to me, what I want for my future. His eyes held her steadily. I came west to start a new life after the war, to build something that was mine. The Triple B has been my whole world for years. It's a magnificent achievement, Abigail said softly. You should be proud. I am, but these past few months since you arrived, he paused, seeming to search for the right words. I've realized that a ranch is just land and cattle without the right people to share it with. Abigail's breath caught as Dakota raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. I'm not offering just employment anymore, Abigail. I'm offering my heart if you'll have it. I know it's too soon, perhaps, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. It doesn't feel too soon, she whispered. Not when every day I've spent here has felt more right than all the years that came before. Dakota's smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and worry. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he drew her into his arms. I love you, Abigail Garland, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I think I have since I found you weeping on that trail and you looked up at me with those brave, defiant eyes. I love you too, she replied, the words feeling both momentous and as natural as breathing. Though I tried very hard not to at first, his low chuckle vibrated against her. Did you now? And why is that? Because falling in love with my employer seemed terribly improper, she admitted. And because I was afraid to trust in permanence after losing everyone else. Dakota's expression sobered. I can't promise forever no one can in this life, but I can promise that as long as I have breath, I'll stay by your side, if you'll let me. Instead of answering with words, Abigail rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. Dakota responded immediately, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other drew her closer. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. When they finally parted, both breathless, Dakota rested his forehead against hers. I take it that's a yes. Abigail laughed, joy bubbling up from some deep wellspring inside her. Yes, Dakota Blackwell, that's definitely a yes. The days leading up to the territorial water rights hearing were filled with both anticipation and tension. Dakota and Abigail worked side by side to prepare their case, gathering documentation of the Triple B-TKS water usage, land improvements, and historical claims. They also found moments of private happiness, stolen kisses in the office, long rides together across the ranch land, and quiet conversations by the fire after the rest of the household had retired. Their growing relationship was accepted with knowing smiles by Mrs. Willoughby and the ranch hands, who had watched the connection develop between them with approval. The men are pleased, Dakota told Abigail one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. They think you're good for me, that I smile more and bark less since you came. Abigail laughed, leaning against his shoulder. And what do you think? I think they're right, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. You've brought light back into my life, Abigail. Purpose beyond just surviving and building. The night before they were to travel to Cheyenne for the hearing, Dakota proposed a small celebration with the ranch staff. Mrs. Willoughby outdid herself with a special dinner, and afterwards, Jimmy surprised everyone by producing a fiddle and playing lively tunes that soon had the kitchen filled with clapping and impromptu dancing. Dakota led Abigail in a waltz, his hand warm at her waist as they moved around the cleared space. Whatever happens tomorrow, he murmured for her ears alone, remember this moment. This is what matters, our people, our home, our life together. Abigail's heart swelled at the simple perfection of his words. Our home, she repeated, loving how it sounded. I never thought I'd find one again after losing my parents. You have, Dakota assured her. Whether we win or lose tomorrow, the Triple B is your home now, our home. They set out for Cheyenne at dawn the next morning, taking the ranch wagon with Henry and 2 trusted cowboys as escorts. The territorial capital was a full day's journey, and Dakota wanted to arrive with time to meet with their legal representative before the hearing. The town was bustling when they arrived, with cattle buyers, freighters, and the usual mix of frontier businesses creating a lively atmosphere. Dakota secured rooms for their party at a respectable hotel, making sure Abigail was comfortably settled before heading out to meet with the lawyer. "Rest if you can," he advised her. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Abigail tried to follow his suggestion, but anxiety kept her pacing the small hotel room. So much depended on the commission's decision, not just Dakota's ranching operations, but the future they were planning together. If Randall succeeded in his challenge, the Triple B would face a precarious future with limited water access. A knock at her door roused her from these worrying thoughts. Expecting Dakota or perhaps Mrs. Willoughby, who had accompanied them to lend propriety to the journey, Abigail was startled to find Eleanor Randall standing in the hallway. "Miss Garland," Eleanor said smoothly, "I heard you had arrived in town. May I come in? I have a matter of some urgency to discuss." Reluctantly, Abigail stepped aside to admit her visitor, leaving the door partially open for propriety's sake. Eleanor glanced around the modest hotel room with barely concealed disdain before turning her attention to Abigail. "I'll come directly to the point. My father is prepared to make one final offer before tomorrow's hearing. Mr. Blackwell handles all ranch business matters," Abigail replied coolly. "You should speak with him." "This offer is specifically for you," Eleanor countered. $5,000 in cash, today if you will testify that the Triple BTK's bookkeeping has been irregular and that Dakota has misrepresented the ranch's water usage. Abigail stared at the woman in disbelief. "You're asking me to perjure myself, to betray the man I love for money. Love." Eleanor laughed, the sound brittle in the small room. "My dear Miss Garland, be realistic. Dakota Blackwell took you in because he needed help with his accounts and perhaps enjoyed having a pretty face around the ranch. Men like him don't marry educated Eastern women. They may dally with them, but they marry practical frontier girls who understand ranch life. You know nothing about Dakota," Abigail said, anger rising in her, "or about me for that matter. I would never betray his trust, not for $5,000 or $50,000. Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then perhaps you'll reconsider when you learn what the alternative might be. My father has influential friends on the commission. Without your testimony, he's prepared to present evidence that Dakota Blackwell harbors rustlers among his men and has been stealing cattle from neighboring ranches." "That's a lie. Truth is often what those in power decide it is," Eleanor said coldly. "Especially in territories still establishing their legal systems. A serious accusation like rustling could ruin Dakota's reputation, even if eventually disproven." Abigail straightened her spine, meeting Eleanor's gaze without flinching. "Miss Randall, I suggest you leave now. And you can tell your father that if he presents false accusations tomorrow, I have documentation of every suspicious incident at the Triple B these past months, including tampering with irrigation systems, boundary riders trespassing at night, and shots fired at our ranch hands." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in Eleanor's eyes, but she quickly masked it. "Consider carefully, Miss Garland. This may be your only chance to secure a future for yourself that doesn't depend on a rancher's changeable affections." After Eleanor departed, Abigail sat heavily on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling with a combination of anger and fear. The Randalls were clearly desperate enough to resort to outright lies and bribery. What else might they attempt before tomorrow's hearing? When Dakota returned an hour later, she immediately shared the details of Eleanor's visit. His face darkened with fury as she recounted the bribery attempt and the threats that followed. "This confirms what our lawyer suspected," he said grimly. "Randall is planning to introduce false testimony about rustling, but he didn't count on you refusing his daughter's offer or having documentation of their activities. Will it be enough?" Abigail asked anxiously. Dakota took her hands in his. "I don't know. But we'll face it together, with truth on our side." That evening, as they dined with their small party in the hotel restaurant, Abigail noticed Victor Randall and several expensively dressed men at a table across the room. Randall raised his glass in their direction, his smile predatory. "Commissioners," Dakota murmured, following her gaze. He's entertaining them before tomorrow's hearing. Is that legal? Abigail whispered back. Not strictly ethical, but not uncommon either, Dakota replied. Frontier justice has its own rules sometimes. They retired early, mindful of the important day ahead. Dakota escorted Abigail to her room, lingering in the doorway. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said softly, remember that you've already given me more than I ever hoped for. The Triple B is just land and cattle. You're my heart, Abigail. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. And you're mine. We'll face tomorrow together and whatever comes after. The territorial government building was imposing by frontier standards a 2-story brick structure with formal chambers for official proceedings. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the hearing room was filled with interested parties, including several neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Promise Creek, and of course, the Randall contingent. Dakota and Abigail sat at a table with their lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Harrington, who had represented ranching interests throughout the territory for over a decade. Across the aisle, Victor Randall and his legal team arranged papers with confident expressions. The 3 commissioners entered and took their seats at the raised platform at the front of the room. The chairman, a stern-faced man named Judge Wheeler, called the proceedings to order. This commission will hear arguments regarding water rights on Elkhorn Creek, which flows through properties owned by the Silver Dollar Ranch and the Triple B Ranch, he announced. Mr. Randall has petitioned for a reallocation of water access based on the size and economic importance of his operations. Mr. Blackwell opposes this petition on the grounds of prior claim and established usage. We will hear from both parties, examine evidence, and render a decision based on territorial law and precedent. Victor Randall's lawyer presented first, outlining the Silver Dollar's expansion plans, the number of people employed, and the economic benefits to the territory if the ranch were granted greater water access. His arguments were polished and persuasive, focusing on progress and development. When he concluded, Judge Wheeler asked, Mr. Randall has suggested in his petition that the Triple B Ranch has not been making optimal use of its water allotment. Do you have evidence to support this claim? The lawyer hesitated, glancing at Randall, who gave a subtle nod. Your Honor, we have reason to believe that Mr. Blackwell's operation has been engaged in irregular activities that call into question his stewardship of this valuable resource. What activities? The judge pressed. We have witnesses prepared to testify that cattle rustling has occurred on Triple B land, with the knowledge and possibly the participation of Mr. Blackwell himself. A murmur ran through the hearing room. Dakota's jaw tightened, but he remained outwardly calm. Judge Wheeler frowned. That's a serious accusation, Counselor, and one that seems tangential to water rights. Do you have substantial evidence? We have a witness who will testify to seeing Triple B hands moving unmarked cattle at night, the lawyer replied. And another who will confirm that Mr. Blackwell's bookkeeping has been irregular, possibly to conceal these activities. At this, Abigail straightened in her chair. The second witness had to be someone they expected to bribe or coerce, since she had refused Alina's offer. Harrington rose to object. Your Honor, these accusations are completely unfounded and unrelated to the matter at hand. Mr. Blackwell has been a respected rancher in the territory for nearly a decade with an unblemished reputation. Judge Wheeler considered this, then nodded. I'm inclined to agree. Unless you can show a direct connection between these alleged activities and water usage, the Commission will disregard these accusations. Randall's lawyer pressed on. Your Honor, if a rancher is engaged in illegal activities, surely that reflects on his fitness to maintain primary rights to a vital resource like Elkhorn Creek. The judge sighed. Very well. Present your witnesses, but be aware that this commission is not a criminal court. Our focus remains water rights. A rough-looking man Abigail didn't recognize was called forward. He identified himself as Jake Mercer, a drifter who had worked briefly at several ranches in the area, including the Silver Dollar. Mr. Mercer, Randall's lawyer began, Please tell the commission what you observed on the night of August 12th near the boundary between the Triple B and Silver Dollar ranches. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. I seen some Triple B hands moving cattle after midnight. Cattle without clear brands being pushed toward their north pasture. And did you recognize any of these men? One of them was Jimmy Wilson, works for Blackwell. The others I couldn't make out clear in the dark. Dakota leaned over to whisper to Harrington, who nodded and made a note. When it was their turn to question the witness, Harrington approached with casual confidence. Mr. Mercer, you say you observed this on August 12th. That's right. And you're certain it was Jimmy Wilson you saw? Yes, sir. Known him since he was a boy. Harrington smiled slightly. That's interesting, Mr. Mercer, because Jimmy Wilson was in Cheyenne on August 12th, delivering documents to the land office. We have signed receipts confirming his presence here, over 100 miles from where you claim to have seen him. Mercer paled visibly. Must have been another night then. Or perhaps another story altogether, Harrington suggested. Mr. Mercer, how much did Victor Randall pay you to testify today? Objection. Randall's lawyer shouted. Withdrawn, Harrington said smoothly. No further questions for this witness. Judge Wheeler looked distinctly unimpressed. Does the Silver Dollar have any other witnesses regarding these rustling allegations? Randall conferred hurriedly with his lawyer, who then announced, Our second witness is unavailable today, Your Honor. Then let us return to the actual matter before this commission, the judge said firmly. Mr. Harrington, please present the Triple B Tickets response to the water rights petition. Harrington methodically outlined Dakota's prior claim to the creek, the improvements made to ensure efficient water usage, and the potential damage to Triple B operations if access were restricted. He introduced documentation of the ranch's growth and responsible land management, much of it prepared by Abigail over the past months. Then, in a strategic move they had planned the night before, he called Abigail to testify about the suspicious incidents at the Triple B during Dakota's absence. Miss Garland, Harrington began after she was sworn in, please state your position at the Triple B ranch. I am the bookkeeper and administrative manager, Abigail replied clearly. I also managed ranch operations during Mr. Blackwell's recent absence on a cattle drive. And during that time, did you observe any unusual activities around the ranch boundaries? Abigail described the series of incidents: boundary riders, damaged irrigation gates, and the confrontation with Alina Randall. She presented her carefully documented records, including dates, times, and detailed descriptions. And did Miss Randall make any specific offers or threats during her visit? Harrington asked. Abigail glanced at Alina, who sat stone-faced beside her father. She offered me employment with the Silver Dollar at a higher salary, and implied that the Triple B Tickets records might be challenged at this hearing if Mr. Blackwell didn't agree to her father's water rights proposal. And last night, here in Cheyenne, did you have another encounter with Miss Randall? Yes, Abigail confirmed. She came to my hotel room and offered me $5,000 to testify falsely that the Triple B Tickets bookkeeping was irregular and that Mr. Blackwell had misrepresented the ranch's water usage. A shocked murmur ran through the room. Alina Randall half rose from her seat, her face flushed with anger, but her father pulled her back down. That's a lie, she hissed loudly enough for everyone to hear. Judge Wheeler banged his gavel. Order. Miss Randall, you will have an opportunity to respond if your counsel calls you as a witness. Randall's lawyer, looking distinctly uncomfortable, conferred with his client before addressing the commission. Your Honor, we have no questions for Miss Garland and no further witnesses to present. The remainder of the hearing proceeded more conventionally, with expert testimony about water flow rates, agricultural needs, and territorial development priorities. By mid-afternoon, both sides had presented their cases, and the commissioners retired to deliberate. Dakota, Abigail, and their small group waited tensely in an antechamber, while Randall and his entourage occupied a similar room across the hall. You were magnificent, Dakota told Abigail, his pride evident. Your testimony completely undermined Randall's strategy. I only told the truth, she replied modestly. Though I admit, facing a leaner across that room was more difficult than I expected. The truth has power, Dakota said, taking her hand, especially when delivered with the quiet dignity you showed today. An hour later, they were called back into the hearing room. Judge Wheeler cleared his throat before announcing the commission's decision. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, this commission finds no compelling reason to alter the existing water rights allocation for Elkhorn Creek. The Triple B Ranch has established prior claim, demonstrated responsible usage, and contributed significantly to territorial development. The petition for reallocation is therefore denied. Dakota squeezed Abigail's hand as the judge continued. Furthermore, this commission is deeply troubled by evidence of attempted witness tampering and false testimony. While we have no jurisdiction over such matters, we are referring our concerns to the territorial marshal for possible investigation. These proceedings are concluded. Outside the government building, Victor Randall intercepted them on the steps, his face mottled with fury. "This isn't over, Blackwell," he growled. "Not by a long shot." Dakota regarded him calmly. "I think it is, Victor. The commission saw through your tactics today. Push this further and you might find yourself facing charges rather than filing petitions." "You think you've won," Randall laughed harshly. "I still own half the valley. One water rights decision won't change that." "No," Dakota agreed. "But it might change how your neighbors and business associates view you. Reputation matters out here, Victor. You might want to consider that before your next move." As Randall stormed off to his waiting carriage, Abigail slipped her arm through Dakota's. "Do you think he'll retaliate?" "He'll try something eventually," Dakota admitted, "but today's ruling will make it harder for him to find allies, and we'll be ready." That evening, they celebrated their victory with a fine dinner at Cheyenne's best restaurant. Henry proposed a toast to Miss Garland, the triple BTK's secret weapon, which made Abigail blush, but also filled her with pride. Later, as they strolled back to their hotel under a canopy of stars, Dakota guided Abigail to a small park where a bandstand stood illuminated by paper lanterns. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "A celebration of my own," Dakota replied, his eyes twinkling. "I arranged it this morning, regardless of how the hearing turned out." A trio of musicians appeared on the bandstand: a violinist, a guitarist, and an accordion player. They began playing a gentle waltz, the music floating through the warm evening air. Dakota bowed formally. "May I have this dance, Miss Garland?" Laughing with delight, Abigail curtsied and stepped into his arms. They moved together around the small park, the lamplight casting their shadows across the grass. "This is magical," Abigail murmured as they danced. "How did you arrange it so quickly?" "The hotel manager's brother is a musician," Dakota explained. "It took some persuading, and perhaps a slightly excessive fee, but some moments are worth the expense." As the waltz ended, Dakota led Abigail to a wrought iron bench beneath a flowering tree. Taking both her hands in his, he looked into her eyes with an expression of such tenderness that her breath caught. "Abigail Garland," he began, his voice unusually solemn. "4 months ago, I found you weeping on a dusty trail, convinced that no one would ever stay. I made you a promise that day, a promise I intend to keep for the rest of my life." Slowly, he knelt before her on one knee, still holding her hands. "I love you more than I thought possible after all the losses life has dealt us both. You've brought joy and purpose back into my days, challenged me to be better, and shown me that a home is more than land and buildings." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a perfect diamond that caught the lamplight. "I'm asking you to stay with me always as my wife, my partner, and my heart. Will you marry me, Abigail?" Tears of happiness spilled down Abigail's cheeks as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. Finally, she managed to whisper, "Yes, Dakota, yes, with all my heart." His face illuminated with joy. Dakota slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was tender and sweet, a promise of the life they would build together. The musicians, who had paused during Dakota's proposal, struck up another melody, this one bright and celebratory. Dakota swept Abigail back into a dance, their laughter blending with the music as they whirled beneath the stars. "When?" Abigail asked breathlessly as they danced. "When shall we marry?" "As soon as you wish," Dakota replied. "Tomorrow at the courthouse if you want, or a proper church wedding back in Promise Creek, whatever would make you happiest." Abigail considered this as they moved through another turn. "I think a simple ceremony at the ranch. With our people around us in the home we'll share." She smiled up at him. "In 2 weeks perhaps, long enough to prepare but not so long that we must wait." 2 weeks, Dakota agreed, his eyes warm with love. "I'd marry you tonight if I could, but Mrs. Willoughby would never forgive us if she didn't have time to bake a proper wedding cake." They returned to Promise Creek the following day, sharing their news with the ranch household to general delight. Mrs. Willoughby immediately began planning the wedding feast, while Henry organized the men to construct an arbor near the creek where the ceremony would take place. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations. Abigail, with Mrs. Willoughby's help, transformed her simple blue dress with the addition of lace and pearl buttons purchased in town. Dakota rode to Cheyenne and returned with a gold band to match Abigail's engagement ring. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the community. To Abigail's surprise, several of the women she had met at the church social called at the ranch, bringing small gifts and offers of assistance with the wedding preparations. Miss Peterson, the schoolteacher, presented her with a beautiful hand-embroidered tablecloth, while the mayor's wife contributed a family recipe for wedding cake that Mrs. Willoughby declared worthy of trying at the very least. Victor Randall maintained a conspicuous silence following the hearing, neither congratulating them nor causing further trouble. Eleanor was reportedly planning an extended visit to relatives in Denver, removing another potential source of tension. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect blue sky that seemed unique to Wyoming. Abigail woke early, too excited to sleep, and stood at her bedroom window watching the sun rise over the mountains that had become so dear to her. "Happy wedding day," Mrs. Willoughby said, entering with a breakfast tray. "I thought you might prefer to eat up here while the men are stomping around downstairs pretending they know how to decorate." Abigail laughed, accepting the tray gratefully. "Is Dakota among them?" "He was until Henry sent him out to check cattle, said he was more underfoot than helpful." The housekeeper smiled fondly. "Never seen that man so nervous, not even before the hearing. He wants everything perfect for you." "It already is," Abigail said softly, "perfect in all the ways that matter." By mid-afternoon, the ranch was transformed. Lanterns hung from tree branches, flowers gathered from the surrounding meadows adorned every surface, and long tables had been set up near the house for the wedding feast. The arbor by the creek was twined with greenery and late summer blooms, creating a natural cathedral for the ceremony. In her room, Abigail allowed Mrs. Willoughby to help her dress and arrange her hair. The blue dress, with its added touches of lace, looked almost like a proper wedding gown. In her hair, she wore a small spray of wildflowers instead of a veil. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Willoughby declared, blinking back tears. "Like you belong here, like you've always belonged here." A soft knock at the door revealed Jimmy, looking unusually tidy in a new shirt and polished boots. "Miss Garland," he said shyly, "Mr. Blackwell asked me to give you this." He extended a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside, Abigail found a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Opening it, she discovered a tiny pressed wildflower, the same variety that had been blooming beside the trail where they first met. A note in Dakota's bold handwriting accompanied the gift. "To remind you that sometimes, the darkest moments lead us to our greatest joys. All my love, Dakota." Tears threatened to spill and ruin her carefully applied powder. "Please tell Mr. Blackwell it's perfect," she told Jimmy, "and that I'll wear it proudly." Mrs. Willoughby fastened the locket around Abigail's neck, then stepped back to survey the final effect. "There," she said with satisfaction. "A bride worthy of the triple BTK's future." Guests began arriving as the afternoon progressed. Neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Promise Creek, and even Sheriff Barnes, who had ridden over from the county seat for the occasion. By 4 o'clock, when the ceremony was set to begin, nearly 50 people had gathered near the creek. Henry appeared at Abigail's door, looking uncommonly dignified in a formal black suit. "Miss Garland," he said, removing his hat. "Mr. Blackwell wondered if you might do him the honor of letting me escort you to the ceremony, seeing as your father isn't here to do so." Touched by Dakota's thoughtfulness, Abigail placed her hand on Henry's offered arm. "I would be honored, Mr. Atkins." Together, they made their way down the path to the creek, where Reverend Wallace waited beneath the flower-bedecked arbor. Dakota stood beside him, resplendent in a new black suit, his normally unruly hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was his expression, as he caught sight of Abigail, that took her breath away, a look of such profound love and wonder that it seemed to illuminate him from within. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and unwavering as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When Dakota slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, but his eyes glistened with emotion. "By the authority vested in me by God in the territory of Wyoming," Reverend Wallace proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Dakota gathered Abigail into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, and the assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Abigail felt a sense of completion she had never known before, as if the scattered pieces of her life had finally found their proper arrangement. The celebration continued well into the evening, with abundant food, music provided by Jimmy and several other ranch hands who proved surprisingly talented, and dancing on a wooden platform Henry's men had constructed for the occasion. As twilight deepened into night, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Dakota found Abigail sitting by the creek, taking a moment's respite from the dancing. "Mrs. Blackwell," he said, settling beside her and taking her hand, "are you happy?" Abigail looked up at the man who had transformed her life in so many ways, from rescuing her in her darkest hour to building a future with her that promised both purpose and joy. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "I never imagined finding such happiness again after losing my family. You've given me more than a home, Dakota. You've given me a place to belong." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And you've given me a reason to make the Triple B more than just a successful ranch. With you by my side, it's truly a home." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the creek's gentle murmur and the more distant sounds of celebration from their guests. "What happens next?" Abigail asked eventually. "Now that we've secured the water rights and celebrated our marriage," Dakota smiled, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "We build our future one day at a time, expand the ranch perhaps, start a family when we're ready." He looked down at her with tender curiosity. "What do you want, Abigail, for yourself, for us?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "I want to help make the Triple B the finest ranch in the territory. I want to watch the seasons change across this beautiful land. I want children who will grow up knowing both their parents love them fiercely." She turned to face him fully. "And I want to grow old with you, Dakota Blackwell, watching our life's work flourish around us." His kiss was gentle but filled with promise. "Then that's exactly what we'll do, my love." Together, as they rejoined their guests for one last dance beneath the star-filled Wyoming sky, Abigail reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. 4 months ago, she had knelt weeping in the dust of a lonely trail, convinced that everyone she loved would always leave her. "No one will stay," she had wept, her heart broken by loss after loss. But Dakota had lifted her onto his horse and made a promise. "I will." And he had kept that promise, not just with his presence but with his heart. In doing so, he had helped her find not only a home and a purpose, but the courage to love again, to build a life filled with the very permanence she had once believed impossible. As they danced among friends who had become family, on land that had become home, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. Here, with Dakota, in the shadow of the Wyoming mountains, she had finally discovered what it meant to truly belong.